I had spent weeks planning my 35th birthday celebration. Every detail had been carefully arranged, from the handwritten invitations to the string quartet playing softly in the corner of our dining room. Even the centerpieces, elegant arrangements of white lilies and blue hydrangeas, had been selected to match the antique china that had belonged to my grandmother. The guest list was small but significant. Close friends, a few colleagues from the university where I taught literature, and of course my husband Garrick. No family remained for me, not since my father had passed away 11 months earlier. Garrick had been unusually attentive that morning, bringing me breakfast in bed, something he never did, and presenting me with a slender jewelry box containing a diamond bracelet that must have cost a small fortune. I remember thinking how strange it was, this sudden generosity from a man who had grown increasingly distant over the past year. Now I understand it was guilt, disguised as affection, a final performance before the curtain dropped on our marriage. The evening had progressed beautifully until dessert. The conversation flowed as freely as the wine, and for the first time in months, I felt a genuine happiness warming my chest when my closest friend Lorraine brought out the birthday cake, a three-tiered confection topped with fresh berries. Everyone sang. I closed my eyes, made a wish that things with Garrick would improve, and blew out the candles in one breath. I should have wished for something else. Garrick stood up, champagne flute in hand, and the room fell silent in anticipation of what they assumed would be a loving toast. His face wore that half smile I'd come to recognize, the one that never quite reached his eyes. "To my wife," he began, his voice carrying that artificial warmth he reserved for public occasions. 5 years of marriage. Who would have thought we'd make it this far? Something in his tone made my smile falter. There was an edge there, sharp and dangerous. "Actually," he continued, his eyes now fixed directly on mine, "I think it's time everyone knew the truth about our perfect little union." He set down his glass with deliberate precision. 5 years ago, your father paid me $500,000 to marry you. Now he's dead, and I'm free." The words hung in the air like poison. The room went completely silent, that terrible, suffocating silence where you can hear your own heartbeat thundering in your ears. I felt the blood drain from my face as Garrick reached for his left hand, twisted the platinum band from his finger, and tossed it across the table. It struck my chest before dropping into my lap. "The contract specified 5 years," he continued, his voice cold and clinical now, "or until Montgomery's death, whichever came first. Well, the old man's been gone nearly a year, and I've more than fulfilled my obligation. I've got the papers drawn up. You'll be hearing from my lawyer tomorrow." I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The room swam before my eyes as I tried to process what was happening. My father had paid my husband to marry me. Every anniversary celebration, every intimate moment, every whispered promise, all of it purchased. I looked around at our guests, witnessing their expressions transform from shock to that particular kind of pity reserved for public humiliations. Garrick was already moving toward the door, car keys jingling in his hand, when a voice broke through the horrified silence. "I believe you've forgotten something rather important, Mr. Harrison." Elias Thornfield, my father's oldest friend and attorney, rose slowly from his seat at the far end of the table. At 73, he moved with the deliberate care of someone who had learned that patience often revealed what haste concealed. He reached inside his jacket and withdrew a sealed envelope. "Miss Blackwood," he said, addressing me by my maiden name with pointed emphasis, "your father foresaw all this. Your inheritance took effect after your husband said those words." Garrick froze mid-stride, his hand on the doorknob. When he turned back to face us, his expression had changed completely. The smug confidence had vanished, replaced by something I had never seen on his face before: naked fear. "What did you say?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "Perhaps this is a conversation best continued in private," Elias suggested, glancing meaningfully at our stunned guests. I sat motionless, the discarded wedding ring still in my lap, as my world collapsed and reformed around me. The carefully constructed reality I'd lived in for 5 years was shattering, revealing something darker and more complex beneath. Whatever was in that envelope Elias held, whatever my father had arranged from beyond the grave, it had the power to terrify the man who had just so callously discarded me. For the first time since Garrick's announcement, I felt something other than humiliation. I felt curiosity, and beneath that, something harder and colder. The first stirrings of a desire for justice. The next few hours passed in a blur. Someone, Lorraine, I think, tactfully ushered our guests out with murmured apologies. Garrick refused to leave, his earlier bravado replaced by a silent, seething presence as he paced the living room. Elias suggested we all sit down. "I always knew Montgomery was a calculating bastard, but this—" Garrick finally broke his silence, gesturing toward the envelope Elias had placed on the coffee table between us. "What kind of man sets a trap for his own son-in-law?" "The kind who understood exactly what kind of man you are," Elias replied evenly. He turned to me, his eyes softening with genuine concern. "Juniper, I'm deeply sorry you had to learn about your marriage this way. Your father wanted to tell you himself, but his illness progressed too quickly at the end." "He knew?" My voice sounded strange to my own ears. "All this time, my father knew my husband married me for money?" "Your father arranged it," Elias said gently. The room seemed to tilt sideways. "I don't understand." Elias sighed, removing his glasses and polishing them with a handkerchief, a habit I'd observed countless times during childhood visits to my father's study, where the two men would talk for hours over brandy. 5 years ago, Montgomery received a diagnosis: pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was poor from the beginning, though he managed to outlive the doctor's initial estimates by several years. I shook my head, trying to make sense of this. "But he didn't tell me he was sick until 3 years ago. He didn't want to worry you," Elias continued. "But, more importantly, he was concerned about your future. You were 30, unmarried, focused entirely on your academic career. He worried about you being alone after he was gone. So he bought me a husband?" The words tasted bitter on my tongue. "He made an arrangement," Elias corrected, "with specific terms and conditions." Garrick laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Terms and conditions he's apparently still enforcing from the grave? Open the damn envelope, Thornfield. Let's see what Montgomery's final game is." Elias ignored him, keeping his attention fixed on me. The agreement was simple on the surface. Garrick would marry you, provide companionship and protection for a minimum of 5 years, or until Montgomery's death, whichever came later. In exchange, he would receive $500,000 upon the wedding, with the suggestion of further inheritance after fulfilling his obligations. "Suggestion," Garrick spat. "The old man promised me the bulk of the estate if I kept his daughter happy, but the will didn't mention me at all. Just some trust that no one will explain to me." I looked between them, trying to process everything. So my entire marriage has been a sham? A business transaction? The reality was beginning to sink in. Each revelation, like another nail being driven into the coffin of what I had believed was my life. "Not entirely," Elias said carefully. "The financial arrangement was real, yes, but your father hoped, perhaps naively, that genuine affection might develop over time." Garrick snorted. "The man was delusional." "Did he really think I'd fall in love with—" He stopped abruptly, perhaps realizing that completing that sentence would only worsen his position. I flinched anyway, the unspoken insult landing as intended. What had Garrick seen in me that made the idea of actual love so preposterous? I'd always known I wasn't conventionally beautiful, too tall, too angular, too serious, but I'd thought my husband had seen past that to something worthy of love. Montgomery was many things, but delusional wasn't one of them, Elias said. He was, however, extremely thorough. Which brings us to this. He tapped the envelope. Your father anticipated this exact scenario. He instructed me to deliver this only if Garrick revealed the arrangement to you in a way designed to cause pain. Open it, I said, suddenly desperate to know what my father, this stranger who had apparently orchestrated my entire adult life, had planned. Elias broke the seal and removed several pages of legal documents. He skimmed them briefly, then looked up at Garrick with something approaching satisfaction. As of approximately 8:30 this evening, when you disclosed the private arrangement to Juniper and your assembled guests, several key provisions of Montgomery's will have been triggered. Garrick leaned forward, tension visible in every line of his body. What provisions? First, Elias said, your monthly stipend from the family trust, which I believe you've been enjoying for the past 11 months, has been terminated, effective immediately. Garrick's face contorted. He can't do that. That money is mine, part of the original agreement. The original agreement, Elias continued as if Garrick hadn't spoken, required discretion. You have violated that requirement in spectacular fashion. Additionally, your access to all Blackwood properties, including this house, has been revoked. This is my house, too, Garrick protested. My name is on the deed. Is it? Elias raised an eyebrow. Perhaps you should check that documentation more carefully. Montgomery never actually transferred ownership. You've been living in a property held in trust with conditional occupancy rights that have now been terminated. I watched Garrick's face as understanding dawned. My father, it seemed, had never trusted my husband at all. He had merely rented him, like an expensive security service with additional benefits. This is ridiculous, Garrick said, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice now. You can't just erase me from this marriage with some legal tricks? I have rights. Indeed you do, Elias agreed. You have the right to the original $500,000 payment, which I believe you've largely spent. You have the right to whatever personal possessions you brought into the marriage, and you have the right to consult your own attorney, though I suspect they'll advise you that the prenuptial agreement you signed is quite ironclad. Prenuptial agreement. The words triggered a memory, signing papers in my father's study the week before the wedding. Garrick had assured me it was standard protection for both of us. I had trusted him, had signed without reading the fine print because I was in love, and believed he loved me too. What else? I asked Elias, sensing there was more. The final provision, Elias said, his eyes never leaving Garrick's increasingly pale face, concerns the primary Blackwood estate and business holdings. The inheritance, Garrick said flatly. Yes. Montgomery's will stipulated that if Garrick fulfilled his obligations with dignity and discretion, a significant portion of the estate would indeed pass to him. Elias paused. However, in the event that Garrick chose to reveal the arrangement in a manner designed to hurt you, Juniper, the entire inheritance would pass directly to you, with specific provisions preventing any claim by Garrick, even as your spouse. The silence that followed was absolute. I looked at my husband, this stranger I had shared a bed with for 5 years, and saw naked calculation in his eyes. He was already reassessing, trying to find a new angle, a way to salvage something from the wreckage of his plans. You're lying, he finally said to Elias. Show me the documents. Gladly. Though they won't change the reality of your situation. Elias passed the papers to Garrick, who snatched them and began scanning frantically. I sat motionless, overwhelmed by the cold mechanical nature of it all. my marriage, my home, my very understanding of my life and relationships, all of it engineered by my father for reasons I was only beginning to grasp. I felt like a character in someone else's story, moving through scenes without understanding the plot. "This can't be legal," Garrick muttered, flipping through the pages. "No court would uphold this kind of vindictive nonsense." "I assure you, it's entirely legal," Elena said calmly. "Montgomery consulted with several specialists in estate law. Everything is properly executed and filed." Garrick threw the papers down. "So that's it? 5 years of my life, and I walk away with nothing but the initial payment, which, may I remind you, barely compensated me for what I gave up to enter this farce of a marriage." "What exactly did you give up, Garrick?" I asked, finding my voice at last. "You lived in a beautiful home. You had access to my father's connections, his club memberships, his social circle. You've been unemployed for the past 3 years, ever since you claimed you needed to find yourself. What exactly did this arrangement cost you, beyond having to share a bed with a woman you clearly find repulsive?" Garrick had the decency to look momentarily ashamed. "I never said you were repulsive, Juniper. But let's not pretend this was a love match. Your father approached me, not the other way around. I was doing him a favor." "For $500,000? I pointed out. "Yes, for money," he admitted, "but also because I respected Montgomery. He was concerned about you, said you were too absorbed in your books and research, that you needed someone to pull you into the real world. He thought we'd be good together." I laughed, a short, sharp sound that held no humor. "Well, he was wrong about that, wasn't he?" Garrick's expression hardened. "Clearly." He stood up, straightening his jacket. "I'll have my attorney contact you tomorrow. Whatever game your father was playing, I'm not going to be the only one who loses. There has to be a way to challenge this." "You're welcome to try," Elias said mildly, though I should mention that Montgomery also established a substantial fund specifically for legal defense against any claims you might bring. "The family has considerably deeper pockets than you do, Mr. Harrison." Garrick glared at him, then at me. For a moment I thought he might say something else, offer an apology perhaps, or some explanation that would make sense of the last 5 years. Instead, he simply turned and walked out, the front door closing behind him with a finality that seemed to punctuate the end of a chapter in my life. In the silence that followed, I looked at Elias. Did my father really think this would work? That he could buy me a husband, and somehow that would transform into a real marriage? Elias sighed, suddenly looking every one of his 73 years. "Montgomery was a complex man, Juniper. He didn't see the world the way most people do. He saw it as a series of transactions and calculations." "That doesn't answer my question." "I think," Elias said carefully, "that he genuinely believed he was protecting you. In his own way, he was trying to ensure you wouldn't be alone after he was gone. By deceiving me? By conspiring with a stranger to infiltrate my life under false pretenses? By giving you what he thought you needed, whether you knew you needed it or not." Elias gathered the papers, returning them to his briefcase. "Your father wasn't good at expressing emotion, Juniper, but he loved you very much." I closed my eyes, feeling tears threaten for the first time that evening. Not for my marriage, that grief would come later, but for my father, who had been dying all those years without telling me, who had tried to arrange my future happiness with the same methodical precision he had applied to his business dealings. "What happens now?" I asked, opening my eyes to find Elias watching me with concern. "Now," he said gently, "you begin to take control of your own life. Something your father never quite allowed you to do." After Elias left, I sat alone in the quiet house, trying to reconcile the father I thought I knew with the man who had orchestrated this elaborate deception. Montgomery Blackwood had been a formidable presence throughout my life, brilliant, demanding, and utterly convinced of his own correctness in all things. When my mother died when I was 12, he had channeled his grief into work, disappearing into his office for days at a time while I learned to navigate adolescence alone. He had dictated my education, strongly encouraging me toward practical fields like business or law, barely concealing his disappointment when I chose literature instead. He had micromanaged my social life well into my 20s, arranging introductions to the sons of his associates, inviting suitable young men to our holiday gatherings. I had resisted as best I could, focusing on my studies and later my teaching, finding freedom in the world of books that I couldn't seem to find in my actual life. And then Garrick had appeared, charming, attentive Garrick, who seemed genuinely interested in my research, who asked questions about the medieval texts I specialized in, who looked at me as if I were fascinating rather than disappointing. I had fallen quickly, desperately in love, amazed that someone like him could want someone like me. My father had seemed surprisingly supportive of the relationship, though I now understood why. He had created it, scripted it, like one of the plays he enjoyed attending in the city, and Garrick had played his role perfectly, right up until it no longer served his purposes. I wandered through the house, seeing it with new eyes. The tasteful furnishings, the carefully curated art collection, the library with its floor-to-ceiling shelves, all of it belonged to a woman who didn't exist, a woman who had a loving husband and a life built on mutual choice rather than elaborate deception. In our bedroom, my bedroom now, I supposed, I opened Garrick's closet. His expensive suits hung in perfect order, each one selected with my father's money, each one worn to events where Garrick had pretended to be something he wasn't. I ran my fingers along the sleeves, remembering how I used to straighten his collar before we went out, how he would catch my hand and kiss my palm in what I had thought was spontaneous affection. Had he rehearsed those moments? Had my father's contract included specifications for physical displays of love? The thought made me physically ill. I closed the closet door and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to sort through the tangle of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. Humiliation burned hottest. The memory of Garrick's public declaration, the pity in our guests' eyes. But beneath that was a deeper sense of betrayal, not just from my husband, but from my father. The two men in my life who should have respected me enough to let me make my own choices had instead conspired to design my life without my knowledge or consent. And yet, even as anger rose within me, I couldn't help wondering what would have happened if Garrick had kept his secret, if he had continued the charade indefinitely, perhaps eventually telling me about the arrangement in private, framing it as something that had begun as obligation but transformed into love. Would I have forgiven him? Would I have been grateful for my father's interference if it had led to lasting happiness? The questions were pointless now. Garrick had made his choice, had opted for maximum cruelty in his exit. Whatever his initial motivations for accepting my father's proposal, he had revealed his true character in how he chose to end our marriage. I pulled open my nightstand drawer, searching for tissues, and found instead a small velvet box, the one that had held the diamond bracelet Garrick had given me that morning. I opened it, looking at the glittering stones with new understanding, not a gift of affection, but a final payment, a conscience-easing gesture before the public humiliation. I snapped the box shut and threw it across the room, taking grim satisfaction in the sound it made hitting the wall. My phone buzzed with an incoming text. Lorraine, checking to see if I was all right, offering to come back if I needed company. I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. How could I possibly explain what had happened? How could I admit that my entire marriage had been a transaction, that the husband she and our other friends had envied me for had been essentially an employee of my father's? I set the phone aside without responding. I would deal with the social fallout tomorrow. Tonight, I needed to be alone with the stranger I had apparently been all along, the woman whose life had been constructed around her without her knowledge, whose relationships had been manufactured for her protection. I needed to figure out who Juniper Blackwood actually was, beneath the careful engineering of Montgomery Blackwood's legacy. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake, watching shadows move across the ceiling, cataloging memories and re-examining them for signs I should have noticed. There had been clues, now that I looked back. The way Garrick sometimes checked his watch during our conversations, as if mentally calculating how much longer he needed to pretend interest. The mysterious phone calls he would take in another room. The way he would occasionally study me with a clinical detachment when he thought I wasn't looking. By morning, exhaustion had dulled the sharpest edges of my pain, leaving a hollow sort of clarity in its wake. I showered and dressed as if preparing for battle, choosing clothes that felt like armor, a crisp white shirt, tailored black pants, low heels that made me feel grounded. I had decisions to make, a life to reclaim. Garrick had taken his car but left his house key on the entry table, a small courtesy that seemed absurd given the circumstances. I dropped it into a drawer, making a mental note to have the locks changed anyway. Then I called Elias. "I need to understand exactly what I've inherited," I told him when he answered. "All of it. Not just the headline version you gave last night. I want to see every document, every account statement, every property deed. I want to know what my father was thinking." There was a pause, then a soft chuckle. "You sound just like him when you take that tone. Direct, no nonsense. The comparison should have pleased me. My father's approval had been something I'd sought my entire life, but now it only irritated me." "I'm nothing like him," I said flatly. "He manipulated people. He arranged their lives without their consent. I would never do that." "Perhaps not," Elias conceded, "but you have his determination and his intelligence. Montgomery always said you were smarter than he was, though I don't think he ever told you that." This gave me pause. My father, acknowledging my intelligence, the man who had questioned every academic choice I'd made, who had suggested repeatedly that my field of study was interesting as a hobby, but hardly a serious pursuit. "Meet me at my office at 10, Elias continued. "I'll have everything ready for you." Elias's office occupied the top floor of a Victorian building downtown, its interior a testament to the attorney's 6 decades of practice. Dark wood paneling, leather-bound law books, and the faint smell of pipe tobacco created an atmosphere of old-world gravitas that had always intimidated me as a child. Today, however, I found it oddly comforting, a solid, unchanging space in a world that had suddenly lost all its familiar contours. Elias greeted me with a brief embrace, then led me to a conference room where stacks of folders and binders covered a massive oak table. "Montgomery's complete financial and legal footprint," he explained, gesturing to the daunting array. 47 years of business dealings, investments, property acquisitions, and personal arrangements, including, of course, the matter of your marriage. I sank into a chair, momentarily overwhelmed by the sheer volume of documentation. "Where do we start? Perhaps with this?" Elias placed a sealed envelope in front of me. My name was written on it in my father's distinctive handwriting, bold, slanting characters that seemed to lean impatiently forward, as if even his penmanship was in a hurry to get to the next task. "He left this for you, to be delivered after his arrangement with Garrick was revealed." I stared at the envelope, suddenly reluctant to open it. What could my father possibly say that would justify what he'd done? What explanation could compensate for the humiliation, the betrayal, the 5 years of living a lie? "Would you like some privacy?" Elias asked gently. I shook my head. "Stay. please. I might have questions." With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded several pages of heavy stationery. My father's handwriting filled them from margin to margin, not a single space wasted. Efficiency, even in his final communication. "My dear Juniper," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then two things have occurred. I am dead, and Garrick has revealed our arrangement to you in a manner that caused you pain. I anticipated both eventualities, though I had hoped for better from him." I paused, imagining my father writing these words, perhaps already weakened by the cancer that would eventually take his life. Had he felt any remorse as he penned this explanation? Any doubt about the choices he had made? "I will not insult your intelligence by pretending my actions were anything but high-handed and paternalistic," the letter continued. "I arranged your marriage without your consent or knowledge. I selected a husband for you based on criteria I deemed important. I paid him handsomely to enter your life and remain there. These are not the actions of a modern, enlightened father. They are the actions of a desperate man facing his own mortality and terrified for his only child's future." I glanced up at Elias, who was watching me with careful neutrality. "Did you help him write this?" He shook his head. "Montgomery drafted it himself. I only witnessed his signature." I returned to the letter. "When I received my diagnosis 5 years ago, my first thought was not of my own death, but of your life after I was gone. You were 30, unmarried, with few close friends and no romantic prospects. Your entire existence revolved around your academic work, worthy and intellectually stimulating, yes, but ultimately isolating. I feared you would retreat further after my passing, until one day you might look up from your books and realize that life had passed you by entirely." A surge of indignation rose within me. How dare he presume to know what I wanted from life? How dare he decide that my chosen path was inadequate? But even as anger flared, a small voice whispered that perhaps he hadn't been entirely wrong. I had used my research as a shield, a way to avoid the messiness of real human connection. After so many failed attempts at relationships in my 20s, I had convinced myself I was better off alone with my medieval manuscripts and scholarly articles. "I met Garrick through business channels," my father's letter explained. "He was working for a client of mine, bright, personable, ambitious, but lacking the connections and resources to advance. I observed him for several months before approaching him with my proposal. I believed he had the potential to be a good companion for you, intellectually curious enough to engage with your interests, socially adept enough to draw you out of your shell, and financially motivated enough to accept an unconventional arrangement. I thought of our first meeting, a supposed coincidence at a university function where Garrick had approached me, charming and attentive, asking intelligent questions about my research. Had he rehearsed those questions with my father? Had they strategized the best way to capture my interest? The terms were straightforward, the letter continued. $500,000 upon marriage, with a suggestion of a substantial inheritance if the marriage proved successful. Success in this context was defined not by love, though I hoped that might develop naturally, but by your happiness and integration into a fuller life. I wanted you to experience partnership, companionship, the day-to-day rhythm of sharing your life with another person. Did you know about all of this? I asked Elias, unable to keep the accusation from my voice. I knew about the financial arrangement, he admitted. I drafted the contracts. But the specific terms of Garrick's performance, for lack of a better word, were between him and your father. Performance. The word cut through me like a blade. My marriage is theater. My husband is a paid actor, executing a role designed by my father. I fought back tears as I continued reading. I recognize that in explaining my motivations, I may only be deepening your sense of betrayal. For this, I am truly sorry. I have always struggled to express my love for you in conventional ways, Juniper. After your mother died, I retreated into the world I understood: business, contracts, measurable outcomes. I convinced myself that providing material security was enough, that emotional nurturing was a luxury rather than a necessity. I was wrong, and by the time I realized my mistake, old habits were too deeply ingrained to change. I remembered the awkward pats on the shoulder that were my father's version of affection, the expensive gifts that arrived precisely on my birthday and Christmas, the rare but genuine pride he displayed when I achieved academic recognition. He had loved me in his way, limited though it was. If Garrick has revealed our arrangement in a manner calculated to hurt you, then he has failed the most important test of character. A truly decent man, even one initially motivated by financial gain, would have found a way to end things without causing you public humiliation. His choice to do otherwise confirms my growing suspicion that he lacks the fundamental integrity I had initially believed he possessed. I couldn't help but laugh. A short, bitter sound. My father, judging Garrick's integrity, as if his own actions had been above reproach. In anticipation of this outcome, I have arranged for all of my business holdings, properties, and investments to pass directly to you upon Garrick's breach of confidentiality. The extent of these assets may surprise you. I have always been more successful than I led either of you to believe. I looked up at Elias. What does he mean by that? Your father maintained a certain strategic ambiguity about his net worth, Elias explained. He allowed people, including Garrick, to believe that Blackwood Enterprises was valuable, but not exceptional. The reality is quite different. How different? Perhaps we should review the financial summaries now, Elias suggested, reaching for one of the folders on the table. The next hour passed in a blur of numbers and legal terminology as Elias walked me through my inheritance. The house, valued at approximately $2 million, was only the beginning. There were commercial properties throughout the state, minority stakes in several successful technology companies, a diversified investment portfolio, and the core business, Blackwood Enterprises, which specialized in logistics and supply chain management for medical equipment. Altogether, my father had left me assets worth nearly $100 million. $100 million? I repeated, struggling to comprehend the figure. That's impossible. We lived well, but not like this. Your father was notoriously frugal in his personal life, Elias said. He believed ostentatious displays of wealth attracted the wrong kind of attention, but he was an exceptional businessman and investor. The company alone generates approximately $7 million in annual profits. I sat back, trying to process this information. All those years of my father questioning my career choice, suggesting that academia wouldn't provide the security he wanted for me, and all along he had been building an empire that would render such concerns irrelevant. Did Garrick know about this? I asked. About the true extent of the inheritance? No, Elias said, with a small, satisfied smile. Montgomery was very careful to maintain the impression that while comfortable, his estate was modest by wealthy standards, perhaps 5 to 10 million total, enough to motivate Garrick's interest, but not enough to justify truly extraordinary measures. Another layer of calculation, another level of my father's chess game revealed. He had dangled a significant but not life-changing inheritance before Garrick, knowing that the full prize, had Garrick been patient and genuine, was exponentially greater. There's more, Elias said, sliding another folder toward me. This contains information about several unusual investments your father made in the past few years. I opened the folder to find documentation of large payments to private investigation firms digital security companies, and what appeared to be surveillance specialists. What is all this? Your father had Garrick monitored, Elias said quietly. Not constantly, but periodically throughout your marriage. He wanted to ensure that the arrangement was being honored in both letter and spirit. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. He spied on us? In our home? Nothing so invasive, Elias assured me. Primarily monitoring of communications, financial transactions, and public movements. He wanted to verify that Garrick was being faithful and that he wasn't secretly planning to abandon the agreement. And was he? Faithful, I mean. The question emerged before I could consider whether I actually wanted to know the answer. Elias hesitated. There were incidents. Nothing conclusive in the early years, but increasing evidence of indiscretion in the past 18 months. Your father received a preliminary report shortly before his final hospitalization. I believe it contributed to his decision to alter the inheritance structure as he did. The confirmation of Garrick's infidelity shouldn't have hurt, not after everything else I'd learned, but it landed like a physical blow nonetheless. Not because I still loved him, but because it was one more humiliation, one more way in which I had been a fool. So my father knew Garrick was cheating, knew their arrangement was falling apart, and still said nothing to me? The anger I'd been suppressing all morning finally broke through. He let me continue living a lie rather than admit his precious plan had failed. He was very ill by then, Elias said gently, and I believe he still hoped that Garrick might rise to the occasion, might choose to become the man Montgomery had believed he could be. The man my father paid him to pretend to be, I corrected bitterly. Elias didn't contradict me. Instead, he reached for the last page of my father's letter, which I had set aside in my shock over the inheritance figures. You should finish reading. There's something important in the final paragraphs. I reluctantly picked up the letter again, finding my place amid my father's neat handwriting. If you have reached this point in my letter, Juniper, you have likely learned the full extent of your inheritance. I hope this knowledge provides some comfort amid the pain of discovering the truth about your marriage. Financial security cannot compensate for emotional betrayal, but it can provide the freedom to rebuild your life on your own terms. Freedom, the word resonated within me. For all his manipulation and control, my father had ultimately given me the one thing he had never allowed me during his lifetime: complete independence. I have one final confession, the letter continued. While I arranged your marriage to Garrick, I did not select him from among strangers. He was not random, nor was he merely convenient. He was chosen because he was already in your orbit, already watching you from afar. During my initial investigation into potential candidates, I discovered that Garrick had attended 3 of your public lectures at the university. He had made inquiries about you among mutual acquaintances. In short, before I ever approached him, he had already noticed you. I stared at the words, trying to make sense of them. Garrick had noticed me independently, had sought information about me, but that meant my proposition to him was built upon an interest that already existed, my father wrote. I simply accelerated and formalized what might have developed naturally, had you both been less reserved in your approaches to relationship. I tell you this not to excuse my interference, but to suggest that perhaps not everything between you was manufactured. Perhaps somewhere beneath the contracts and calculations, there was a genuine connection that might have flourished without my heavy-handed intervention. I set the letter down, unable to continue. The possibility that Garrick might have approached me naturally, might have pursued me without financial incentive, only made the reality of our arranged marriage more painful. My father had robbed us both of the chance to discover what might have grown organically between us. Instead, he had poisoned any potential for genuine feeling with his money and his manipulation. He thought he was helping, Elias said softly, watching my face. In his own way, misguided as it was, he thought he was giving you both what you wanted, but were too hesitant to reach for on your own. That wasn't his decision to make, I said, my voice tight with suppressed emotion. He had no right to orchestrate my life that way, no right to decide what would make me happy. No, Elias agreed. He didn't. And I believe he knew that at the end. This letter, he gestured to the pages scattered before me, is as close to an apology as Montgomery Blackwood was capable of making. I gathered the letter, folding it carefully along its original creases. Whatever my father's intentions, whatever his rationalizations, the result was the same. My marriage had been built on deception from its very foundation. No amount of posthumous explanation could change that fundamental truth. What happens now? Elias asked after a moment of silence. I looked around at the stacks of documents, the physical representation of my father's legacy, both the wealth he had accumulated and the control he had exercised. Now I figure out what parts of this legacy I want to keep and what parts I need to dismantle entirely. The next few days passed in a blur of practical arrangements and difficult conversations. I hired a locksmith to change the locks on the house, contacted a divorce attorney, and began the process of transferring my father's various accounts and properties into my name. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, asserting control over a life that had been directed by others for too long. Lorraine came by with coffee and sat with me while I explained the situation in halting, abbreviated terms. I couldn't bring myself to share the full, humiliating truth that my father had purchased my husband like one might arrange for a long-term service contract. Instead, I told her that Garrick and my father had had a financial arrangement I hadn't known about, and that its revelation had destroyed whatever genuine feeling might have existed in our marriage. I always thought there was something off about him, Lorraine said, squeezing my hand. He looked at you sometimes like he was evaluating a purchase he wasn't sure about. Her words stung, but I appreciated her honesty. Why didn't you say something? She shrugged. Would you have believed me? You were so in love with him, and he seemed to make you happy. Who was I to question that? Who, indeed? I had been so desperate to believe in Garrick's affection, so grateful for his attention, that I had ignored countless small inconsistencies and moments of disconnect. My father had known this about me, known that my academic confidence masked a deep personal insecurity, and had exploited it for what he believed was my own good. On the fourth day after my birthday disaster, as I was sorting through Garrick's remaining possessions in preparation for having them sent to whatever address he provided, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Juniper Blackwood, I answered, balancing the phone between ear and shoulder as I folded one of the Garrick sweaters. Juniper? Garrick's voice, tentative in a way I'd never heard before. I wasn't sure you'd take my call. I set down the sweater, suddenly aware of how domestic the act of folding his clothes felt, how jarringly intimate after everything that had happened. What do you want, Garrick? To talk. In person. There are things I need to explain. I laughed, short and humorless. I think you were quite clear at my birthday party. 5 years ago, my father paid you $500,000 to marry me. Now he's dead, and you're free. What part of that requires further explanation? He was silent for a moment. The part where I didn't tell the whole truth. The part where your father's arrangement wasn't the beginning of the story. Please, Juniper. One conversation. After that, if you never want to see me again, I'll respect your wishes. I should have refused, should have hung up, and continued with the process of excising him from my life. But my father's letter had planted a seed of curiosity that I couldn't quite ignore. Had there really been something between us before my father's intervention? Had Garrick actually noticed me independently, been drawn to me without financial incentive? Fine, I said finally. One conversation. Tomorrow at Elias's office, 4 o'clock. I named the location deliberately, wanting the protection of the neutral territory and potentially a witness. Thank you, Garrick said, relief evident in his voice. I'll be there. I hung up without responding, unsure whether I was making a terrible mistake in agreeing to see him. What could he possibly say that would change anything? The fundamental reality remained. He had married me for money, had lived with me for 5 years under false pretenses, and had chosen to reveal that arrangement in the most publicly humiliating way possible. Any explanation he offered now would be too little, too late. And yet, as I continued packing his things, the expensive watches my father had gifted him for Christmases and birthdays, the bespoke suits that had made him look so distinguished at university functions, the collection of rare books he'd assembled with surprising, genuine interest, I couldn't help wondering if there might be some small grain of truth in my father's final claim. Had there been moments of real connection between us, islands of authenticity in an ocean of deception? The following day, I arrived at Elias's office precisely at 4, dressed with careful neutrality in a simple navy dress and minimal jewelry. I had spent too many years thinking about how to please Garrick with my appearance. Today, I dressed only to please myself. Elias greeted me in the reception area. He's already here, he said quietly. Conference room 3. Are you sure you want to do this alone? I'm happy to sit in. I shook my head. I need to handle this myself, but stay nearby if you don't mind. Of course. He squeezed my shoulder gently. Remember, you hold all the cards now, Juniper. Whatever he wants, whatever he's offering, you owe him nothing. The reminder steadied me as I walked down the hallway toward the conference room. Garrick stood when I entered, his expression a careful mix of contrition and determination. He looked different somehow. Smaller, less assured than the man who had shared my home for 5 years. He wore a suit I didn't recognize, slightly ill-fitting around the shoulders. Thank you for coming, he said, remaining standing until I took a seat across from him. Hey, you said you wanted to talk. So talk. I kept my voice even, my face composed. Garrick nodded, folding his hands on the table. First, I want to apologize for how I revealed our arrangement. It was cruel and unnecessary. You deserved better. Why did you do it that way? In front of everyone? Was public humiliation part of your exit strategy all along? He shook his head. No, God, no. I was angry. Not at you, but at the situation. At your father. At myself. When I learned that the inheritance wasn't what I had been led to believe, that after 5 years I was walking away with essentially nothing beyond the initial payment, I snapped. You were angry about money, I clarified. So you decided to hurt me. It sounds terrible when you put it that way. It is terrible, Garrick. There's no other way to put it. He looked down at his hands. You're right. It was unforgivable. But there's more to the story than you know. More than your father told you in his letter. I stiffened. You know about the letter? Elias mentioned it when I met with him yesterday. He didn't share the contents, just the fact of its existence. Garrick leaned forward. Did your father tell you that I knew you before he approached me? That I had attended your lectures? Asked about you? He did? Did he tell you why? I hesitated. He implied that you were, interested in me. Personally. Garrick laughed, a genuine sound that caught me off guard with its familiarity. How many times had I heard that laugh across the dinner table, in our bed, during walks through the park near our home? Had all of those moments been performances too? Interested is an understatement, he said. I was fascinated by you, Juniper. Not just by your mind, though your brilliance was the first thing that drew me to your lectures, but by your passion, your complete absorption in your subject. The way you came alive when discussing ancient texts that would put most people to sleep. I felt a flush creep up my neck, unsure how to respond to this unexpected praise. If that's true, why accept my father's offer? Why not simply ask me out like a normal person? Because I wasn't a normal person in your world, Garrick said simply. I was working as an assistant to one of your father's business associates. I had a liberal arts degree from a state school, mountains of student debt, and no family connections. You were Montgomery Blackwood's daughter, brilliant, established in your field, financially secure. The gulf between us seemed impossible to bridge. So instead, you let my father pay you to bridge it artificially? The anger was returning, burning through my momentary confusion. You let him buy you as a companion for his spinster daughter because you didn't have the courage to approach me honestly? Garrick flinched at the word spinster, but didn't deny the accusation. It wasn't that simple. When your father approached me, I was at a low point. The company I was working for was downsizing. I was about to lose my apartment. And suddenly, here was this powerful man offering me not just money, but access to a world I'd always been excluded from, and the chance to be close to you, even if under false pretenses. So you took the deal, I said flatly. You agreed to pretend to love me for financial gain. That's just it, he said, his voice suddenly urgent. I didn't have to pretend. Not at first. My interest in you was genuine. I thought, naively I realize now, that I could separate the financial arrangement from my actual feelings, that I could accept your father's money while building something real with you. I stared at him, trying to reconcile this narrative with my memories of our early relationship. The tentative first dates, the long conversations about books and ideas, the shy first kiss on my doorstep. Had any of that been real? Or had it all been carefully orchestrated performance? Even if that were true, I said slowly, it doesn't explain the last 5 years. The distance that grew between us, the affairs. I watched his face carefully as I mentioned the last part, confirming from his expression what Elias had already told me. Garrick had the grace to look ashamed. I never meant for that to happen. But as time went on, the weight of the deception became unbearable. Every time you looked at me with love in your eyes, every time you trusted me with your thoughts and fears, I felt like a fraud. I started pulling away because I couldn't reconcile the man you thought I was with the man I knew myself to be. And the cheating? Was that also because of your overwhelming guilt? I couldn't keep the sarcasm from my voice. No, he admitted quietly, that was weakness, pure and simple. I was lonely in our marriage, Juniper, not because you weren't enough, but because I wasn't fully present. I couldn't be, not with the secret always between us. So you found comfort elsewhere. I'm not proud of it. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 5 years of deception and missed connections settling between us. I thought of all the times I'd sensed Garrick's distance and blamed myself, wondering what I had done wrong, how I had failed to be the wife he wanted. All those nights lying awake, trying to decode his silences and absences, never suspecting the true nature of the chasm between us. What do you want from me, Garrick? I finally asked. Why are we having this conversation? The marriage is over. You made that abundantly clear. He hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a folded document. This is a formal renunciation of any claim to your father's estate. I've already signed it. I want you to know that I'm not contesting the will or pursuing any legal action regarding the inheritance. I took the document without looking at it. Is that supposed to impress me? You're giving up a claim you never had in the first place? I'm trying to show you that I'm not the mercenary your father's arrangements made me appear to be. Garrick's voice took on an edge of frustration. Yes, I accepted his money. Yes, I married you under false pretenses. But it wasn't only about the money, Juniper. Not for me. What was it about then? It was about a chance at a life I never thought I could have. About being close to a woman I admired from afar, but never believed would look twice at someone like me. And yes, it was about financial security. I won't deny that. But if it had been only about money, I would have walked away years ago. As soon as I realized your father's health was declining faster than expected, I considered this. It was true that Garrett could have abandoned our marriage much earlier without consequence. My father's rapid deterioration in the past 2 years had been unexpected, accelerating what doctors had initially predicted would be a much slower decline. If Garrick had been motivated solely by the promised inheritance, he could have waited out the final year after my father's death and then left with whatever Montgomery had allocated to him. Instead, he had chosen to reveal the arrangement in a way that guaranteed he would receive nothing beyond the initial payment, a sum that, while substantial, was hardly life-changing in the long term, especially given his spending habits over the past 5 years. "If you're not here about money, then what do you want?" I asked again. Garrick met my eyes directly for the first time since I'd entered the room. "I want a chance to start over. Not as husband and wife. I know that's impossible now. But as two people getting to know each other honestly. No contracts, no expectations, no deception." I stared at him, momentarily speechless. Of all the things I had imagined he might say, this request hadn't even made the list of possibilities. "You can't be serious." "I am," he insisted. "Juniper, despite everything I care about you, I always have, even when I was failing miserably at showing it. I'd like the opportunity to see if there's anything salvageable between us. Not the manufactured relationship your father designed, but something authentic that we choose for ourselves." The audacity of his proposal left me stunned. After 5 years of living a lie, after public humiliation and private betrayal, he wanted a second chance? As if we could simply wipe the slate clean and begin again, untainted by the deceptions that had defined our entire relationship? "No," I said, the word emerging with quiet finality. "Whatever might have been possible between us was destroyed the moment you accepted my father's money. Even if I could forgive the arrangement itself, which I'm not sure I can, I could never forget that you were willing to deceive me about something so fundamental. Every memory I have of our marriage is contaminated now, Garrick. Every moment I thought was genuine is suspect." He looked stricken, though he must have anticipated this response. "I understand. I had to try, to see if there was any possibility." "There isn't." I stood up, gathering my purse and the document he had given me. "I appreciate your willingness to sign this," I said, indicating the renunciation. "It will simplify the legal proceedings." Beyond that, I think we have nothing left to discuss. Garrick rose as well, his shoulders slumping slightly. "For what it's worth, Juniper, I am sorry. Not just for how things ended, but for agreeing to the arrangement in the first place. We'll never know now what might have developed between us naturally, without your father's interference." The echo of my own earlier thoughts gave me pause. We would indeed never know. And that was perhaps the cruelest aspect of my father's well-intentioned manipulation. By attempting to arrange my happiness, he had effectively destroyed any chance of it developing organically with the very man he had selected. "Goodbye, Garrick," I said simply, turning toward the door. "Juniper," he called as I reached for the handle. I paused, but didn't turn around. "Whatever you may think of me now, know that not everything was a lie. There were moments, many of them, when I forgot about the arrangement entirely, when it was just you and me, and it was real." I left without responding, unable to bear the weight of might-have-beens and could-have-beens that his words evoked. In the hallway, Elias was waiting, his expression questioning. "It's done," I told him. He signed a renunciation of any claim to the estate. The divorce should be straightforward. And you? Elias asked gently. How are you? I considered the question, searching for the truth beneath the layers of anger and hurt. I'm ready to start figuring out who I am without my father's orchestration, I said finally. Who Juniper Blackwood is when she's making her own choices, living her own life. Elias nodded, satisfaction evident in his eyes. Your father would be proud of you, you know. Not because you're doing what he would have wanted, but because you're doing exactly what he never had the courage to do himself, defining your own path. As I left the building and stepped into the late afternoon sunshine, I found myself thinking about legacy, what we inherit from those who came before us, and what we choose to do with that inheritance. My father had left me wealth beyond anything I had imagined, security beyond anything I had dreamed possible. But his true legacy was more complicated, a tangle of love and control, protection and manipulation. I could choose to reject it entirely, to view my inheritance as nothing but the fruits of my father's calculating nature. Or I could acknowledge the love that had motivated his actions, flawed though their execution had been, while still charting a course entirely my own. Standing on the sidewalk, keys to my newly secured home in one hand and the document severing the last tie to my fraudulent marriage in the other, I felt something unexpected. Possibility. The path ahead was unclear, unmarked by anyone else's expectations or designs. For the first time in my adult life, my future was entirely my own to shape. Whatever came next, whether professional reinvention, personal discovery, or even someday a relationship built on mutual choice and complete honesty, it would be authentic in a way my life had never been before. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my father's machinations, and Garrick's deceptions begin to lift. Not gone entirely. Such things leave marks that time may fade, but never fully erase, but no longer defining the boundaries of my existence. The woman who walked away from Elias's office that day was not the same one who had blown out birthday candles a week earlier, wishing for the continuation of a marriage that had never truly existed. She was someone new, someone just beginning to emerge from the carefully constructed cage of others' expectations, someone ready, at long last, to discover who she might become when given the freedom to choose for herself. 6 months later, I sat across from Elias in what had become our regular monthly meeting spot, a quiet cafe near the university, neutral territory where we could discuss the ongoing management of my inheritance without the shadow of my father's presence that still lingered in his office. The transition of Blackwood Enterprises is proceeding smoothly, Elias reported, sliding a financial summary across the table. Jackson is proving to be an excellent CEO. Profits are up 17% since the restructuring. I glanced at the numbers without really seeing them. Hiring my father's longtime operations director to run the company had been one of my first major decisions after the divorce was finalized. Marcus Jackson had worked alongside my father for 20 years, understood the business intimately, and, most importantly, had no personal connection to me that might complicate our professional relationship. That's good, I said, taking a sip of my tea. And the foundation? The Blackwood Foundation for Educational Equity had been my idea, a way to channel a significant portion of my unexpected wealth into something meaningful. We had launched 3 months ago with an initial endowment of $20 million and a mission to provide financial support for students from disadvantaged backgrounds pursuing advanced degrees in the humanities. The first round of scholarships will be announced next week, Elias said with a smile. 15 recipients, full funding for their graduate studies. The board is very pleased with the candidate selection. I nodded, a sense of satisfaction warming me from within. This was something my father would never have done with his money, investing in fields of study he had dismissed as impractical, supporting students who reminded me of myself at their age but without the financial security my father had provided. And on a personal note, Elias continued, his tone softening, "How are you, Juniper?" "Really?" I considered the question, as I always did when he asked it. "I'm good," I said finally. "Better than I expected to be, actually." It was true. The pain of Garrick's betrayal had faded more quickly than I had anticipated, perhaps because our marriage had always been a construction rather than an organic growth. What lingered was a more complex grief for my father, anger at his manipulation mingled with gratitude for the freedom his wealth had ultimately provided me. "The new apartment suits you," Elias observed. I had sold the house 2 months after the divorce, unable to continue living in a space so thoroughly permeated with my father's presence and Garrick's deception. My new home was a light-filled loft in the university district, walking distance from my office, and surrounded by the vibrant energy of academic life. "It does," I agreed. "It feels like mine in a way the house never did." "And the university? I understand you've taken on some new responsibilities?" I smiled, unable to contain a flash of pride. The department approved my proposal for a new interdisciplinary program in medieval studies and digital humanities. I'll be directing it starting next semester. "Congratulations. That's quite an achievement." "It is," I acknowledged. For years, my father's subtle dismissal of my academic pursuits had made me hesitant to pursue leadership opportunities, to put myself forward for positions of authority. That hesitation was gone now, replaced by a growing confidence in my own judgment and capabilities. Elias gathered his papers. Our business concluded for the day. But as he prepared to leave, he paused, his expression turning thoughtful. "Juniper, there's something I've been meaning to ask you. Something that's been on my mind since all this began." "What is it?" Looking back now, with some distance and perspective, "Do you think your father was right about you needing someone in your life? I mean, not about how he went about arranging it, of course," he added hastily, "but about the underlying concern." The question caught me off guard. I had spent so much time analyzing my father's actions, his motivations, his manipulations, but I had carefully avoided this more fundamental question. Had he been right about me? "I think," I said slowly, "that he was right about some things and wrong about others. He was right that I was using my work as a shield against vulnerability and connection. He was right that I was lonely, though I wouldn't have admitted it then, even to myself." I stirred my tea, organizing my thoughts. "But he was wrong to assume that the only solution was marriage, or that I couldn't find my way to a fuller life on my own terms. And he was wrong to think that deception could ever be the foundation for genuine happiness." Elias nodded. "That seems like a fair assessment. The irony," I continued, "is that by trying to control my future, he actually freed me from patterns I might never have broken otherwise. His manipulation forced me to confront questions about my life and choices that I had been carefully avoiding. In trying to direct my story, he accidentally gave me the opportunity to begin writing it for myself." "And what does that story look like now?" Elias asked. "If you're the author rather than a character in someone else's narrative?" I smiled, thinking of the changes I had embraced in recent months, the new apartment, the foundation, the professional risks I had begun to take, and yes, even the tentative steps toward new relationships, not romantic yet, but authentic connections with colleagues and friends who knew me as I was now, not as the woman defined by her father's wealth or her husband's attention. "It's still being written," I told him, "but for the first time, I'm genuinely curious to see how it unfolds. As we parted ways outside the cafe, I found myself thinking about the question my father had never asked me, the one that might have changed everything. What did I want? Not what did he think I needed, not what would make me acceptable in his eyes or the eyes of his social circle, but what would make me genuinely, authentically happy. I was only beginning to discover the answer to that question. The inheritance that had seemed at first like one final act of control from beyond the grave had become instead a launching pad for self-discovery. The wealth that my father had accumulated through decades of calculation and strategy was now fueling explorations he would have neither understood nor approved. There was a certain justice in that, I thought, as I walked back toward the university, a certain symmetry in using the tools of my father's manipulation to dismantle the very patterns he had tried to perpetuate. Perhaps that was the truest inheritance he had left me, not the money or the business or the properties, but the opportunity to define myself in opposition to his careful plans, the chance to become not the daughter he had tried to shape, nor the wife Garrick had been paid to desire, but someone entirely new, someone even I had yet to fully meet. As I entered my office that afternoon, I noticed a small package on my desk. Inside was a book, a rare 15th century manuscript I had mentioned wanting to examine during a departmental meeting the previous week. The note attached was from Dr. Bennett, the new medieval languages professor who had joined our faculty that semester. "Thought you might enjoy this," he had written. "No strings attached, no agenda. Just one scholar sharing a treasure with another who would appreciate it." I ran my fingers over the ancient binding, feeling the weight of history and the lightness of simple, uncomplicated kindness. No strings attached, no agenda. The words resonated with something fundamental I had been learning over these past months. True connection couldn't be purchased or arranged or manipulated into existence. It could only grow naturally between people who saw each other clearly and chose each other freely. I sent a brief message thanking Dr. Bennett for his thoughtfulness and suggesting coffee later that week to discuss the manuscript, a small step, insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But it was my step, taken without calculation or fear, without my father's shadow or Garrick's deception influencing the choice. And in that moment, I understood something my father, for all his intelligence and foresight, had never fully grasped. Inheritance is not merely what we receive from those who came before us. It is what we choose to carry forward and what we deliberately leave behind. It is the complex interplay between legacy and choice, between the patterns we inherit and the new paths we forge. My father had tried to secure my future through elaborate machinations and calculated interventions. But the true gift he had given me, though neither of us could have anticipated it, was the freedom to reject the very certainties he had tried to construct around me. The opportunity to discover that happiness, when purchased, is no happiness at all, and that a life authentically lived, even with all its messiness and uncertainty, is infinitely more valuable than one perfectly arranged by someone else's design